So many of you probably know Ron, who's going to be leading us in the discussion today. And I will embarrass him just a little tiny bit, because I know how much he likes being embarrassed. And say that in a way, we kind of here today because of Ron. About 5 or 6 years ago, he started coming up with all these complicated questions and asking other people, how do we know this stuff, and what and where and why, and all these kinds of questions. And we decided to ease his anxieties a little. He wasn't anxious or anything, but to set his mind at rest, we should get together and have a little group that sits down and works through these things and talks about these things. And here we are about 5 years later. As you can see, the group has grown and we've talked about an awful lot of things over the 5 years. So Rob actually gave the very, very first Coptic apologetics, Aletheia, it wasn't called Aletheia at the time, talk about 5 years ago. I believe it was on the teleological argument for the existence of God. And so he's back today. He's not just going to be talking about one specific argument. Today is more of an overview, kind of an overall look at the case for believing in God. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ron.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming in today. It's really exciting to be here. I'm really happy that we've got a good turnout today. Thanks again to Alana for the very nice introduction, not too embarrassing, so it's okay. So the aim of tonight is to discuss a very, very important question. Probably one of the questions that motivates most of human, or probably one of the most asked questions in human experience, and that's, does God exist? And I think the reason it's important is because the question of does God exist is not just an isolated question of is there an extra piece of furniture in the universe? Is there an extra thing that exists in the universe? The question is, does God exist, has further implications about how we live our life, and there are certain beliefs that are linked in with that as well. So it's important today to discuss, we're going to try to take a broad overview. We're not going to spend too much time on any specific argument, and we'll leave the further, like if you guys want to focus more on a specific issue, we can talk about that more in the end of the discussion. So I'll just give you a brief rundown of the evening today. So we've just had the introduction, and I thought it would be interesting just to kind of be a bit of an icebreaker to get everyone kind of chatting. We'll have a mini quiz, and we'll kind of test your knowledge on some basic apologetics and types of questions in this sort of area, and just try to get the conversation flowing a little bit earlier and put everyone a bit at ease. And then we're going to just have a brief discussion about why does the question itself matter. And then we're going to spend most of the time today talking about the arguments for the existence of God. We're going to focus on about 3 or 4 arguments. We're not going to try to cover all the main arguments. And then if we have time, we'll discuss more of the arguments against the existence of God. And it's important to take a balanced approach because when you're asking does something exist, it's important to look at both sides of the story. So today we'll spend most of the time talking about does God exist, and time permitting, we don't want to have too much information overload or anything like that. Time permitting, we'll discuss a bit more of the other questions in the question and answer period. And then a quick summary, and then most of the time today will be spent on questions and answers. Okay, so we really want you guys to get involved, and there's a lot of very, very good opinions in the audience. I know most of you people here as well, so I know that you guys have very interesting things to say about these sorts of issues. So by no means I don't want to be sitting here rambling the whole night. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with that quiz. It's only a few questions, and as we all know, the highest stakes for any quiz is lollies. So basically, any person who gets a correct answer, I'll have one of my wonderful assistants here to come around and give you an option of some of the lollies. Richard, you want to take that? Yeah. Okay. So we'll start off with the first question. So whoever knows the answer, I want you to raise your hand, and we'll give you an option of amazing lollies that we have here. Okay. So the first question is a very simple question. What does the term apologetics actually mean? Mario.
It's to give an answer or a reason.
To give an answer or a reason, fantastic. give a reason. And so the field of theistic apologetics basically involves giving reason and evidence to provide grounds for believing in God. So that's fantastic. That's a good one. Very, very quick, John. He's dealing with all these things done. All right. So the next question is, what is Pascal's wager? Anyone want to have a guess at that one? I see you're itching to answer. Come on. Sorry, introduce yourself as well.
My name is Jessica.
Jessica.
Is that the only introduction you
Yeah,
need?
that's fine.
It's something to do with believing in God will, if you believe in God, you get to spend, after you die, you go to heaven. If you don't believe in God, you've got the risk of, if God does exist, then not going to heaven.
Okay, that's good enough for me. You can
No, it's a poor big
that's pretty much almost spot on. So basically the argument that it's in one's own best interest to believe in God, that God exists, since the possibility of eternal punishment outweighs the advantage of believing otherwise. So it's just we're not using that as an argument today, but it's just an important, interesting thing in the history of apologetics. So the next question is a bit more complicated. What is pantheism? Yep.
Belief in a lot of gods.
Belief in a lot of gods. Actually, that's not correct. That's polytheism.
Timothy, pantheism, my understanding of that is the belief that the universe itself is God.
Yeah, that's correct. So feel free to implement. Give them options as well. They have to be very responsible. So as you said as well, so pantheism is the belief that the universe is itself God. It's identical with divinity, that everything it composes. So pantheists don't believe in distinct personal God. They kind of believe that nature itself is God. Okay, so the next question. True or false? Jesus' name is mentioned in the Quran more often than Muhammad. Who's saying that one? Okay, Mario already had a shot, so we'll give it to the next guy. We don't want to promote diabetes. Who's got the answer then? Yep. It's true. Do you have any more specific information with that?
I can't remember the number of the figures, but it's much more.
Okay, so that is correct. It's true. Jesus' name is mentioned 5 more times in the Quran than Muhammad, so that's fantastic. Okay, a bit more complicated. List the top 4 world religions by the number of adherents. Which world religions have the most number of people that believe in them? Very bad. No, so we're just talking blanket about Christianity.
Islam?
Sorry?
Islam?
So the top 4 world religions. So which religions have the
We
world?
just asked the first one.
Oh no, so the top 4. Yeah, expand. Why not have a go? Introduce yourself and have a go.
They're not in order though, right?
No, that's alright, don't worry about
Islam, Christianity,
it. Yeah.
Hinduism, hey.
Yeah,
Hinduism and Buddhism?
that's correct. That's actually correct. So Christianity has the most.
In order too.
So Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and then Buddhism. And there's a small note there that actually non-religious people account for about 1 million people, so probably about number 3 there. That includes atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, basically all types of people who don't believe in God, and also some people that do believe in God but they don't identify with any particular religious group. Okay, so a bit more technical one. What's the definition of, what's the philosophical view of determinism?
I've already had my
Anyone want to crack a guess? You can go answer. Yeah.
That all things have a cause.
Any more elaboration? Come on, I know you can do better than that.
Not really. And that's it. Everything that happens
course. So we'll accept that one today because we're running short of answers. Thanks to everyone for the wonderful interaction. But it's a philosophical doctrine that every state of affairs, including every human event, act, and decision, is the inevitable consequence of the antecedent states of affairs and natural law. Basically, what that means is that everything that we do, think, or conduct is as a result of the causes of the nature that happened before that. And the last question is, how old is the universe? I'll volunteer Reggie for this answer. Reggie, wow us with your scientific knowledge.
I'm not actually too sure myself, but I'm guessing 10 billion years.
No, not 10 billion years. Simone?
14 billion years.
14 billion years. Ooh, very close. If we don't have a quicker answer, if we don't have a more accurate answer, we'll give that to Simone. So anyone want to take the title from Simone? 14.7. Not 14.7. Yes. Matthew, yeah. And what's your answer, Matthew? 13.8. That's correct. So it's 13.8. That's very, very close. That's accurate. 13.8.
That's rounded off. I could get more.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, just show us a bit more. Give us the 2 decimal places, to 3, 4 decimal places.
No one knows, so I'll say 1, 2.
Yeah, I think it's like 13.77 billion or something, but very interesting. So that was very, very good, guys. Hopefully all of you guys answered the questions and enjoying your lawyers. So now we're just going to move to the next part. We're not going to spend too much time on this. We'll talk about this a bit more maybe in the question and answer if you guys are more interested. But the question is, why does it matter God exists? We humans have been discussing the existence of God for centuries, and the question is, will that lead you to behave differently in your normal life? Will that lead you to have different beliefs about, for example, things like morality, things like the afterlife, things like that are more enriched in the part of human experience? So I just want you guys to have a quick read of those questions and just kind of think about those answers in your own mind. And we can, if you guys are more interested in discussing this a bit further in the question and answers, we'll go a bit more into that. And then just before we end, I'll just give you my personal answer about why I believe this question is one of the most important questions that we can ask. Okay, so we're delving right in now, getting straight into the topic. This is the juicy part where everyone's really going back and forth. So look, I'll tell you guys, if you guys are interested in giving me feedback, or if you guys want to have a question during the middle of the presentation, feel free to do that. Just raise your hand and we'll bring around the mic and we'll get you to either voice an objection, or if you want to ask a question for more clarification. So just make the night flow a little bit better. So the questions on the arguments on the left-hand side, the arguments we're going to discuss today, the arguments called the 4 arguments that we're going to discuss are the cosmological argument, the teleological or the design argument, the argument from free will, and the moral argument. The other ones on the right-hand side are just some of the arguments that are typically used in defense of belief in God, and we'll just leave those for another time as well. Okay, so we'll begin with the first argument here, and it's the cosmological argument, also known as the Kalam cosmological argument. And basically the argument it's basically about the beginning of the universe. Basically the argument has 3 basic steps. It says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe itself began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. Now this question is motivated by looking around the universe and thinking, has this whole entire universe always been here? In the ancient times, most people, including like the ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, they believed that the universe is always there and always will be there. And that kind of led to the belief of some people that the universe has a kind of divinity in itself, because it's an eternal being, it's always been here. But in more recent times, what we've come to realize is that the whole universe itself hasn't actually always been here. It has come into existence. And that raises the question of, if everything around us, all of the matter, all of the energy, everything that we see, has come into existence, where did that come from? And there's been a lot of different types of explanations, and people have been trying to work out how this is possible, how we can come to a fundamental explanation of the universe. But the key thing is that we are going to discuss this, the answer to this question that comes from a theistical perspective, And that's basically a deductive argument. And so if basically what that means is the first two sentences are true, it logically follows that the third one is true as well. So the first premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause. Basically this, in simplistic terms, this premise is saying that, look, if something hasn't always been here, if something just happened to exist or came into existence, then it must have a cause. When we see, for example, a car or we see planets and we see things like that, we know that they, if they exist and they haven't always been there, they must have had a cause. Something must have brought them into existence. Things don't just pop into existence out of absolute, like, total nothingness. So that's the main basic, that's the gist of the first premise of this argument. The second point is, does the universe exist? Now, we've got several reasons to believe that this whole universe came into existence. We'll discuss the second point here, which is the point that's doesn't work on the TV. That's so we'll discuss the second. The second point is and the second and the fourth point. And basically, we're trying to give you some of the reasons that have led most people to believe today that the universe began to exist. The first reason I think is very, very convincing, a very, very convincing reason, and one of the main reasons that I believe that the universe has come into existence. And this is a philosophical argument based on the fact that it's impossible to traverse an infinite series of events. And it's basically like if someone came today and told you, I've counted down all of the numbers from negative infinity, and I'm now finishing -3, -2, -1, 0. Finished. And then you ask yourself, well, how is that possible? Before any single number that he would have had to say, there's an infinite number of other numbers that he would have had to count beforehand. So before he could have counted -3, he would have had to count -4, -5, -6, and going back onto eternity. So he would have never ever had the opportunity to reach -1 and then 0. Now what does that tell you? What that tells you is that it's impossible for there to be someone actually who has gone through an infinite series of events and reached till today. So what that tells you is that the universe itself, someone hasn't been here for eternity, because it's impossible for there to have been an infinite series of events coming up to today. It's very well linked with the second law of thermodynamics, which basically states that in any system, things tend towards disorder. For example, when I leave my coffee on the table, I leave it nice and warm, and I come back after about half an hour. What's happened to the coffee? It's gone cold. And why is that gone cold? Basically, because of the second law of thermodynamics. Things tend towards becoming cold and becoming, energy tends to be used up. So if the universe has been here for eternity, then all of the energy within the universe would have been used up by now. But it's not. We're still here, there's still energy, there's still light bulbs, we're still breathing. So that tells us that it's impossible that there could have been the universe has lasted all this time. So that's the first reason that we should believe that the universe had a beginning. Second reason is comes from the basic standard model of particle physics, which is called the Big Bang. The standard model of physics about the structure of the universe, which is called the Big Bang theory. Now basically what the Big Bang theory is describing is the model of our universe. And as you can see to the right-hand side of your screen, that's the current state of the universe. That's the current state of the universe with galaxies, stars, and all of that. And as you go back in time, the universe itself has been expanding. So if you extrapolate backwards, the universe actually shrinks down until it gets to a singularity, a point where there's nothing beforehand after that. That's basically, it comes down to that single point, and there appears to be nothing beforehand, nothing before that. Now that's kind of, when you think about that, that's very, very strange. It's very, very dramatic. All of the universe, everything that we see today, everything that we see around us today, at one point in time was shrunk down to an infinitesimal point, and basically that's where time began. That's where all of the world came into existence. And so that leads us to the point, well, on a Christian view or an atheistic view, people would say, well, that makes perfect sense. That's kind of that first initial Big Bang singularity. That might be the initial catalyst event that God used to create the universe. And so that's an explanation of that's a justification of how God will be the creation of the universe. So if we go to the deduction of the argument, so given the first two premises are true, they will lead to the third thing is that therefore the universe has a cause. So, but what does that mean? So, how significant is that? Who cares if the universe has a cause? What does that actually mean about belief in God? Well, if you think about what the universe is the basically defined in this argument as all of matter, all of space, all of time, all of energy. So if you think about the thing that would have had to be the creator or the cause of that entity, that thing in itself would have to be outside of space, would have to be outside of time, it would have to be itself immaterial since it created the matter, it would have to be eternal, and it would have to be extremely powerful. I mean, think about this, creating the whole universe out of absolutely nothing, it would have to be some sort of incredible amount of power. And if you look at those characteristics, they become very, very similar to the theistic concept of God, which is a being who is beyond time and space, extremely powerful and eternal. And it doesn't give you all of the full concept of God that we come to know in theism, like for example, God is loving and kind and knows all things and things like that. But it starts to give you the framework of, look, we've got some of the characteristics of God here. And as we move on with all other arguments, the picture will become more and more rounded, more and more fulfilled, and we'll see more and more of the characteristics of God that become a good explanation of the universe and of where we are today. Okay, so we'll just move on to the next argument. We'll just have a short video.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely.
Okay, so that's basically the explanation of what we're talking about when we're talking about the argument of fine-tuning. Basically, the parameters of the universe, the constants and quantities of the universe, for example, the gravitational constant, the cosmological constant, the proportion and mass of elementary particles, these things had to be exactly the same value they are, or else if they were off by a very, very small fraction, none of us would be here. Now, that is just that is something that scientists have discovered. And then, so you think about this, okay, so here we've got this incredible discovery. How do we explain this? Why is the universe structured in this sort of way? How is it that, that the universe can have these really, really tight parameters? And so there's a couple of explanations that So does everyone have a fundamental understanding of what the fine-tuning of the universe is, or would you like a bit more of an explanation of what the problem is itself? Yeah? Okay, so as you can see here from this this picture that I've done, I've very, very skillfully edited on me. As you can notice with the little red knobs. Basically, if you walked into a room and you found that you looked at this sort of picture and you saw that basically wherever there was this red mark, the dial was turned exactly to that sort of mark, what would be your first impression? Obviously, your first impression would think that, look, this isn't something that's happened randomly, or this isn't someone hasn't just spun the kind of the dials and it's all miraculously kind of landed on the spot. You would think that there must have been someone who carefully dialed every single one of these dials. And each of these dials represents one of those parameters that we're talking about in the universe. And so, in fact, scientists have discovered that these parameters, there's not just like 2 or 3 of these parameters. These parameters are actually very, very, more than about 200 parameters, more about something like that. So if you walk into kind of those radio rooms and you saw every single dial turned exactly to the pole where there was a really small red stripe, you would be very suspicious that there was some sort of person that had done this. So the question is, how about the idea of chance? So the theistic explanation is, look, it's a very simple explanation. The reason that the universe is very, very carefully designed is because God designed it. God is the one who structured the universe that way, and He wanted life to occur. And so He's the one that designed and made the parameters of the universe that very, very specific. The other explanation that people have thought of is, look, what about chance? Okay. But as people know, those sorts of odds are very, very, very unlikely. So when you walk into that radio room and you see all the dials perfectly adjusted to the one with the small tag, well, you think, well, maybe that this is not the only room of dials in the entire world. Maybe there's hundreds and thousands and millions of radio rooms, all with numbers absolutely everywhere, but in some of these rooms, the dials will be turned specifically to a certain part to allow life. And that's basically the theory of the multiverse. The multiverse is saying that this universe that we live in, yes, it's fine-tuned, everything is specifically adjusted to reach those parameters. But there could be millions and infinite number of other universes where the parameters are not exactly very, very tuned. And we just happen to be lucky, and we happen to be lucky to live in this universe, the one where it's specifically fine-tuned for life. Okay, so to explain the multiverse, we're just going to have one of our favorite friends from Family Guy, Chewie, explain what the multiverse theory is.
This is it, Brian.
What's that?
It's how I got the pig. You ever heard of the multiverse theory, Brian?
Well, of course I have, but I'm wondering if you have.
Oh my God, so transparent. Well, the theory states that there are an infinite number of universes coexisting with ours on parallel dimensional planes.
Dimensional planes, right.
Don't do that. Don't repeat the last 2 words like you already kind of knew what I was talking about. You have no idea what I'm talking about. Now, in each of these alternate universes, the reality is different than our own. Sometimes only slightly, sometimes quite radically. The point is, every possible eventuality exists.
And that's where you got the pig, in a parallel universe.
Prepare yourself, Brian, and I'll show you.
But you thought you'd never say Family Guy in church. So as Stewie explains, the multiverse theory is, basically the theory that there's multiple parallel universes out there and each of them slightly different. So there are some problems with this theory in the way that it explains the fine-tuning. These are some of the problems. that are listed here. So the first point is that there is actually no current evidence that suggests that the multiverse actually exists. Now, this may come in the future or not, but at this stage in time, we can't really say that there is any evidence that the multiverse exists. And this is admitted by atheists and theists alike. The second point is that there can be, in principle, no direct proof of the existence of the multiverse, due to its being out of contact with our universe on different planes. So in the Family Guy episodes, Stewie and Brian travel between multiverses, but this is actually, if the multiverse did exist, that would be impossible, because they're in totally different dimensional planes. There's no way to get in contact with them. So then you might ask, how is that possible? If we can never see or never touch or never experiment with anything it's completely isolated from us, how will we ever know that there is such a thing as a multiverse? Well, there's some people that have suggested that if you look at the early universe, you can kind of see, if there was a multiverse, you would expect to see very, very minute changes in the background radiation of the universe, and there might be some small adjustments in that sort of area, and that's what kind of tip you off that there might be a multiverse in the background. But so this would be like an indirect proof. This proof hasn't come through yet, but it would be a possibility to consider in the future. But for now, we've got no evidence, and we've got no ability to access that directly. The third problem, and I think it's probably one of the most important problems, is that the universe itself. The third point is that the multiverse itself had a beginning. Given the arguments that we discussed before, that the multiverse itself must itself have a beginning. And basically, that means that there has only been a certain amount of time where there's been universes being pumped out. So that means that there's no guarantee that there's going to be all of the large enough sample to get one of the finely tuned universes by chance. And the fourth problem, this is the one that I think is a bit more of a real problem for the multiverse theory, and that the multiverse itself would itself require fine-tuning, so it doesn't really explain much, because to have a kind of generator that generates, have a kind of structure that generates universes again and again and again, that system itself must be very, very hard to finely tune, or else how is it able to produce all of these universes coming out? And then the fifth point is the problem of Boltzmann brains. Boltzmann brain is a very, very interesting concept. Basically, it's saying that due to the high improbability that there is a fine-tuned universe, it's actually more reasonable to believe that not a whole entire universe is coming that's fine-tuned, but it's actually rather one single brain came and fluctuated into existence, and that brain is kind of hallucinating all of this reality that we're experiencing at the moment. So that's the sort of power that we're dealing with when we're talking about the teleological argument. In a sense, it's more probable for that to be happening than for this universe to be fine-tuned. So ask yourself this question: do you really think that you're the only person in the universe that exists, and everything that you're thinking now is a hallucination? And so if you are, then congratulations to you. But that's very something very unlikely to believe. I think I heard a joke once from a Christian philosopher called Alvin Benninger, and there was a person in the science department that believed that he was the only person that exists. He's the only person that exists in the whole entire world. Everyone else is kind of an illusion of his consciousness. And so the philosopher was talking to his secretary that day, and he's like, "Is it true that this person is the only one that he believes that we're all really not here, and he's just the only one that exists?" And she's like, yes, we take really good care of Professor so-and-so, because when he goes, we all go. So that's sort of the probabilities that we're dealing with here when we're talking about the fine-tuning. So this leads us to the argument of the fine-tuning of the universe, the design of the universe, that apparent design of the universe can either be explained by chance, necessity, or design. It's not due to chance and necessity, and so therefore it is due to design. And so if the universe is designed, that means that the designer of the universe is a personal being, so someone who wanted to design the universe, and it also means that it's an intelligent being. So here we have more characteristics of God coming up. So we talked about from the first argument, timeless, spaceless, powerful, and now we're talking about intelligent and a person. So this is more of the classic attributes of God coming up. The next argument we're going to discuss, this is probably an argument that I've only been looking into more recently, and it's the argument of free will. And free will is an interesting concept. It's something that we all experience on a day-to-day basis, and we're all very, very invested in our ability to have free will and the importance of free will. But the question is, do we actually have free will, or does it just look like we have free will? And as you can see from the picture, if you guys remember, this is from the movie, the first movie of The Matrix, and basically Morpheus, the main character, gives Neo an option of this pill or this pill. One pill you're going to discover all of these things, and the other pill you're going to go straight back and wake up in bed the next day. So that decision that Neo had to make, was that decision a free decision, or was that decision basically determined for you? And that's why I kind of concluded that question in the beginning about determinism in the quiz, to get you guys thinking about that. Basically, free will is something that we experience day to day, but according to most scientists, and according to natural, if the world is a natural entity, we really don't really have free will. So if God does not exist, if the natural world is all that there is, then human thought, human behavior are basically one of two things. They're either caused physically by the laws of nature, or they're totally indeterministic and random. And neither of which provides an adequate basis for free will. So if you think about if God does not exist, the universe is kind of this really big machine, and it's kind of just spitting out, it's kind of just working and operating by the laws of nature. It's kind of like a watch. All the components are just chugging along. And so any time you think that you're going to make a decision, when you get to the traffic light and you think you're going to turn left or you're going to turn right, you probably think that you make that decision by weighing up, okay, where do I need to go? I need to go here, so that means I have to take this route, and then you turn left. But in reality, according to a naturalistic worldview, a view in a world where God does not exist, that decision was basically made by neurons firing in your brain, chemicals pointing you to decide one way or another. It's not kind of as a result of considering where you want to go, it's just as a result of just nature taking its course. It's kind of like the same thing as a rock falling down a hill. It's just basically nature functioning as it is. So the question is, if a naturalistic worldview or an atheistic worldview kind of says that there is no free will, what sort of reasons are there to believe that we do have free will? And I think we have a few good reasons here to believe that we actually do have free will in our day-to-day lives. And one of the more important ones is morality. If you think about it, if free will is not true, if free will doesn't exist, then, for example, Hitler and all those people, Stalin and all those people that murdered millions of people, you can't really say that they did anything wrong. Because what they were doing is they were just following what the nature was intended to do, and nature was causing them to do. It was just chemicals firing in their brain, causing them to do certain actions. They didn't stop and think about, is this action right or is this action wrong, or what are the consequences of my actions, am I going to hurt someone? They're just kind of chugging along. They're just basically biological machines, kind of like androids, and they're just they have like a preset computer program, and it's just causing them to do everything, which is a very, very challenging view of morality. It makes me think that all of this, anything that's bad or good that's happened, like Mother Teresa, for example, we shouldn't praise her at all. Why should we praise Mother Teresa? She didn't just sacrifice her life to go help others. She basically was just following what her DNA was telling her to do. And so I think that the fact that we realize that morality is, we experience morality, we think that morality is real, and it gives us a good reason to believe that free will is actually true. One of the other interesting reasons to believe that free will is true is because reason presupposes free will. So reasoning involves analyzing arguments and evidence on the basis of merit, something which cannot be done if your choices and beliefs are guided by non-rational, mechanistic natural forces. So once again, when you're, say for example, you're considering the question of does God exist? So like we're all here today, we're considering the question, does God exist? If free will is an illusion and it doesn't really exist, then we're not really considering much at all today. Our beliefs are already been determined by the DNA and by the chemicals in our brain. So that if free will does exist, that gives us the opportunity to think, okay, this is option A, this is option B, what are the reasons I should believe option A, and what are the reasons I should believe option B? and then I consciously being able to make a decision to choose otherwise. If I'm being determined to choose option A and I have no choice, I have no other way of choosing a different option, then that decision is not a rational decision. So in order to reasoning presupposes free will. And also an important reason is, finally, another reason is basically free will is something that we experience on our day-to-day lives. We experience free will every day we wake up. We know that we go through life, we make choices every day. We're often told to make different choices, and we often wish we had made different choices. So the question is, why should we doubt that free will? Why should we doubt that experience that we experience so vividly? What reason is there to doubt that experience? And so it's similar to other experiences that we have. Experiences, for example, of the reality of the past. So we all believe that the world has been here for a long period of time, that we've grown up, we've had all of these memories. But what if I told you that it would be exactly the same if all of this, if you were just created 5 minutes ago, and in your mind there was all these memories of all of your past and all of the things you experienced in the past, you would have no way of differentiating the difference. You would have been able to, the memories of all the experiences that you would have had would have all been stored in your brain. And you would be there'll be no way to tell the difference between the two. But you do believe that. You do believe that reality has been here for a long period of time, and that's because of the experience that you have on a day-to-day basis. And so that's the same sort of principle when it comes to free will. It's that it's something we experience on a day-to-day basis, and we have no good reason to doubt it. So why should we doubt it? So this leads us to the culmination of it, which is the free will argument for God. And so if God does not exist, human free will would not exist. And this is because the world would be a kind of a naturalistic mechanism. And so human free will does exist from the reasons that we talked about, and so therefore God exists. And so it fits in well with the theistic worldview that God would create creatures that are free, and that would have the ability to reason, and have the ability to enter into a relationship with God. And so that kind of provides a decent explanation as to why humans would have free will. Last argument we're going to discuss today is the moral argument. And so this argument is basically saying that, is that a question back there? Yep.
Are you implying that free will is God, or?
No, we're not saying that free will is God, but we're saying that if God did not exist, we wouldn't have free will. But we experience that we do have free will, that means that there should be an existence of God.
Okay. I just think scientifically, like saying free will, if it exists, then that means God exists. I mean, free will would exist, but it doesn't prove that God exists.
Why would you think that?
Because just because one thing exists doesn't mean that it proves the existence of something else.
Yeah, the question is, if God did not exist, then there would be no free will. So you're challenging that. You're saying that it doesn't matter if God exists or doesn't exist, there would be free will anyway.
I was saying if water makes ice, if water didn't exist, then there isn't ice. But ice can have different forms. Just because it's liquid. I mean, liquid exists, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're similar, but.
Yeah, so it's not an argument of identity. We're not saying that free will is God or God is free will. We're saying that if in a world where God does not exist, then basically it will just be nature operating according to fixed laws. Basically everything will be walking around like an automated factory, basically. If you think about an automated factory, the ones that make cars, for example, all of nature would be exactly the same as that kind of just fixed processing at that time. It wouldn't be, and so basically that would preclude free will, because everything that you decide is basically determined by the laws of nature. In terms of there's nothing immaterial in the world. There's no like a free will. There's no consciousness. There's no ability to choose otherwise than what you do. So because you're, in the end of the day, on a view where God does not exist, we are biological machines. We're basically machines made up of chemistry, of DNA.
I get on the other side of the spectrum. If free will didn't exist, God would still exist. I mean, God exists to animals, and they don't necessarily have free will. God exists to water. So free will, for example, for humans to have free will, God could have been existing by himself, and he wouldn't have had to create anything, and God could just exist by himself. But God chose to create. So free will and God are related, but they're not like, for example, they're not like dependent. So like God himself has free will, but God has the choice to create something with free will, or not to create something with free will. Yeah, so did I answer your question? I'm not sure. Yeah, Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So just for clarification, can you define what you mean when you say free will?
So,
Different people mean different things in that space.
yeah, so free will, just the basic definition is the ability to choose otherwise. Yeah, the ability to choose otherwise than what you choose. So, yeah, in a non-deterministic way, yeah. So, for example, like there's indeterministic models that suggest that, for example, all of our actions are just purely random based on like quantum things that are going on a very, very small level in the brain. But in the basic sense of what we're saying, what we mean by free will is the ability to choose, am I going to commit this crime or am I not going to commit this crime? I have the ability to choose otherwise. Okay, so we'll move on to the last argument that we're going to discuss today, and that's the argument of morality. And so this argument, sometimes we get a bit confused. So I'll just try and explain what we mean with the argument in the first place. What we're saying here is that if in a world where God didn't exist, good and bad, right and wrong wouldn't exist in itself. Now, we're not saying here that if someone doesn't believe in God, that means they're a bad person or they're going to do something bad. What we're saying is this is on a philosophical level, the concept of good and evil, where do they come from? Where do they derive from? And so the question is, if God did not exist, if there was no God, it was just us and all of nature around us, what would make something right and what would make something wrong? Would there be any such thing? And so we'll just watch a short video to explain that principle.
God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
So that's basically the moral argument for the existence of God. Basically saying that there has to be some sort of objective standard of what says, according to which we can judge if something is good or something is bad. And if God does not exist, what is that objective standard if it's not God? That leads us to the question of who can set the standard for morality. So if you think about the ancient Aztecs, people living in ancient times in Mexico, they used to have a practice of they used to sacrifice children to the gods, and they thought that this was something honorable and something that must be done. They thought that this was something that was really good. When you compare that to society today, in modern Western society, children are cared for and educated and nourished And if you look at the differences in the moral frameworks between those two populations, if you think about the perspective, if God did not exist, why would we say that our morality is better than theirs? There's no intrinsic kind of value to humanity apart from what we kind of say it is. So there's no kind of standard above where we can say that, no, look, this group of people is not, our view is not just different than theirs, our view is actually better than theirs. So once you say that there is something, an action that's better than another, so once you say, for example, that it is better to nourish a child than to torture a child, you're automatically assuming that there is an objective standard of morality that's outside that. So you need to, and that reference, apart from the existence of God, there is no other reference point for that morality. And so there appears to be the need for an ultimate standard of good and evil, independent of human opinions in time and place. And this can be found in the nature of an immortal God. So those are the main sort of arguments that I wanted to discuss today. These are a list of some of the reasons and objections that people do not believe in God, and we'll discuss that. I think as we've pretty much gotten to the end of our time, we're going to leave the rest of the time we have to discussion. We'll probably leave that for another time. Okay. So just in summary, just to kind of draw everything into a close before we move to more question and answers and bigger discussion, is that I believe that there's a good overall case for the belief in God, and the reasons to doubt in God's existence are either poor or difficult to prove, but we can discuss that tonight. So this is a kind of a slide that I've come up with on a personal level of why I can't be an atheist, and the reason I find it difficult to be an atheist is that atheism requires me to believe that the universe has no explanation for its existence. It came into existence out of nothing. When the universe came into existence out of nothing, it was incredibly fine-tuned to allow for life. The universe just happened to be structured in a way that allowed for us to be able to discover more about it. Consciousness is an illusion, there is no free will, and moral values and duties do not exist. And I find that very, very challenging to accept a worldview in which all those things are true. And so, in summary, belief in God makes sense of many aspects of human experience, such as free will, consciousness, morality, the creation, design, and discoverability of the universe. And just going on, finishing up from that aspect of the first question that we discussed of why does it matter if God exists, these are my reasons that I believe that it's very important, this question of whether or not God exists. Firstly, because we want to know the truth about reality, and we don't want to live in a delusion. And I want to know the truth. I want to not live under a kind of a guise. I don't want to live just to make myself feel better to believe that God exists. I want to know that there is kind of solid evidence to believe that God exists. And God provides a basis for objective purpose and meaning in life. This is a little bit different than what we're discussing today in terms of giving the reasons to believe that God exists. This is more of a reason of why is it important that God exists. And I believe that it's important because God provides us with an objective purpose and meaning in life, whereas if God did not exist, we would have no objective purpose. We'll all end up at the grave, and there will be all the purpose that we'll create for our lives will be basically just what we would make up in our own day-to-day life just to try to get by. And God provides us with the only hope for immortality. So when you think about God, one of the beliefs that's very closely linked to the belief in God is the belief in the afterlife. And so if God does not exist, all of us are going to end up dead in the grave, and there's going to be no afterlife, no future. Basically, all of our lives, no matter how good, no matter how bad you've been in your life, it ultimately makes no difference. And all of humanity, at the end of the day, it makes no difference whether or not we existed or we didn't exist, because all of the universe is eventually going to die and going to be consumed in the heat death of the universe. And so basically, without the existence of God, there's no hope for that kind of that future in the afterlife. And so God provides us that the final question, the final point is God provides us hope that there will be joy and there will be no more suffering in the future. So that's the reasons I think that it's a very important question, and I'm sure it's a question that is very important to you personally, and that kind of reflects on the reason that you've chosen to come today and chosen to pay attention in the belief of God. So that's the end of the discussion. Thank you very much.
So we'll just
questions and answers, and we can promote discussion if you guys want to discuss amongst each other. So we'll go to Richard first.
Yeah, so if God is a loving father, why does he allow his children to suffer? So if he's a loving father, why does he allow his children to suffer? What are your thoughts?
We'll get one to answer that question, or someone else wants to make a...
I believe this is the discussion time, so I'll go to the floor.
Okay, so anyone has people, I think Paul could do that.
I just wanted to say that like suffering doesn't come from God. That's the thing. The devil's the one who causes suffering. He comes to kill, steal, and destroy us. So you can't really blame God for the suffering that happens on earth if the devil doesn't have reign over the earth. The thing is, God gave us the strength to overcome all evil. That's the thing. He came and gave us His Spirit. He gave us His strength and His love. And I guess it's not that He's accepting the suffering. It's that it's just the consequence of the devil reigning over the earth.
That's an interesting point. So, just to give a little bit of a perspective and framework about when we're discussing the problem, this is a problem that's called the problem of evil, and it's one of the most powerful arguments that atheists use to disprove the existence of God, or to question the existence of God. And it's the argument that if God is so loving and caring and powerful, then why is there evil and suffering in the world? So the important thing is to distinguish in this argument if we're talking, are we talking in an emotional sense here, or are we talking in a strictly logical sense? Is this supposed to be like a logical argument to prove that God does not exist, or is this kind of like an emotional rant kind of thing? So we need to distinguish the two difference between that. If we the two, if you look at the bottom there, there's the logical argument, the logical problem of evil, and the probabilistic version of the problem of evil. The logical problem of evil is saying that the existence of an all-good God is logically impossible when there's evil. The two is contradicting each other. It's like saying that there's the immovable object and the object, the force that can't be stopped, the unstoppable force. Yeah. So in terms of that argument has been kind of very well been it's been acknowledged that the argument's kind of been very well put aside by most philosophers. And it doesn't show that there is a logical contradiction between the existence of God and those things. So what we're really discussing in the end of the day is something called the probabilistic version of the problem of evil. And that is to say, given that if there was a God, it's highly, that this is the claim the atheist is making, if there was a God, it's highly probable that there would not be evil. But there is evil, so therefore it's unlikely that God exists. Now, the question is, what reasons do we have to believe that if God did exist, it's highly unlikely that He would allow suffering? So that's a question I'll maybe one of our guests would like to discuss that.
I was wondering, how does that then reconcile with Isaiah 55:7, which is, I formulate light and create darkness, I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things.
So tonight we're not just talking about biblical Christianity. Tonight we're talking more about atheism in general. So we're talking about just kind of the belief in a creator God, a source of morality. We're not talking about specific doctrines in Christianity and specific beliefs in terms of like biblical interpretation and things like that. We're just trying to keep it to a general topic.
Correct on that. There's a video, it's a good video. I'll start off with a verse. I'll link the video to anyone who has that question. It's something completely. But there's a verse that says, he who hates his brother doesn't have the light in him. He who says he's sinners in it doesn't have the light in him. Light is tangible for God from his background. There's a doctor called Dr. Ravi, and if anyone goes to the video about talking about free will and why there's evil in the world. And summarize, if there wasn't a free will, then your choice to choose to love wouldn't be there. So the guy's asking, if someone got shot, why does God allow bad things to happen? And at the end of the day, because we have free will, we choose. And that concern decides where our place is after, in terms of are you going to live with peace and a moral ground where it's set, or not? He's going to be out there and
So I think what Paul's talking about is the free will defense of problem evil. And the thing is that we all,
the majority, I think, or a lot of evil that we experience, that we see in the world, is evil that's caused by people, not evil that happens by natural causes. And so the argument here is that really up to God? God has given us free will, and He's given us the freedom to be able to do those sorts of things. He's been able to give us the freedom to do wrong things and to do right things. And so when someone murders someone, when someone does a crime, the question is, why did God allow this to happen? The question is God, because God allowed us to have free will. And free will in itself is something that is very important. It makes our life basically worth living. If we didn't have free will, we would be, like we were saying, we'd basically be like robots. So free will allows us to love, allows us to reason, allows us to make informed choices. So that's the kind of the justification for why there is some sort of why God allows suffering, because the free will is an important thing. The second thing is that when we do see things happening in the world, the question is, does God have a reason that He's allowing this to happen? Is there a greater good that He's allowing this to happen for? So, for example, if there's a natural disaster like an earthquake or something like that, or if there's like a tsunami or things like that, why is God allowing that to happen? Or the Holocaust, for example, why is God allowing that to happen? Maybe there's a greater good that God is trying to use this to achieve, and we can't see that because we can't see the future. Who knows, maybe in 100 or 200 or 300 years, because of these sorts of events that have happened in the past, hundreds of people and thousands of people become better people, believe in God, end up having eternal life. And those things are very, very important things. Those things are basically the way of allowing something, allowing maybe a moment of suffering or a life of suffering on this earth, but then you get the eternal reward in heaven. So God's got that kind of the ability to see the future and the ability to allow things to happen in certain ways so that He will achieve the greatest good for the most amount of people. So introduce yourself.
Still on the same.
Yeah.
I see this concept of if God allows the free will, He cannot really prevent evil, conflicting with the argument of fine-tuning. Because if someone tries to burn down your building, assuming that it's a bad action, that's evil, God still could have been the fine-tuner, the intelligent designer, could have built the house with sprinkles all over, so whenever someone does evil act, the house automatically, once the sprinkles are no fire, okay? So you're safe as a good person, nothing happens to you. So the fact that God allows evil because evil happens as a free will happening by human beings and God leaves it to burn down, doesn't really sit well with an intelligent designer.
Yeah, so the question is, like, why doesn't God, for example, if someone comes to stab you, why doesn't automatically your body become jelly and just reflects and hits the other guy, for example? And I think the answer to that question is that kind of, if we lived in a kind of universe where any time someone came to do something bad, God prevented it, it will kind of make our moral choices, it will make them irrelevant, it will make them pointless. It will be basically like we're living in a world where it's like a childcare kind of thing. Every time someone comes to do something bad, you're stopped, you're prevented, you're hit on the hand. Your choices don't really, your choices aren't really reflective of your. It doesn't have the consequences. It doesn't have, and if it doesn't have your choices don't have any consequences, then free will becomes a moot point. And I think it's the value of is free will. God could have created a world, for example, where there was no suffering whatsoever, but then that might have had to be a world also where there's no free will. And is that a world better than our world? That's the question. Is it a robotic world where there was just no suffering and no choices either? Is that a better world? Yeah.
Hi, sorry, if I'm allowed to change the subject.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to talk about the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah.
So that's the first video, and then you have the diagram.
Yeah.
If we take multiverses out for a minute, because I don't know enough about them to really discuss that concept. The idea of fine-tuning, that image was great if you bring that up, that you made.
My watch image?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. The problem I have with this argument is that what we do as humans, because we're alive and because we see the world through our own eyes, so everything we see we take meaning from, and we think, you know, we walk around thinking the world is revolving around us, and, you know, our lives are just everything that we are, you know. So we're very sort of egocentric in that way as humans. So when we think about the world and the cosmos, what we do is we draw in these little red marks, and we say, because we're really special, this is where it's going to land, and this is why it's important that it's landed this way. If we take away all of those red marks, and we don't consider ourselves special, we don't consider life special, we don't consider any of it, and we just go back to what you were saying about atheism and thinking everything just naturally plays like a clock. If we just had a random number of dials and they were just randomly spinning by chance, there is an equal chance that the dials would end up looking exactly like that or in any other position.
You're saying that each individual set of weather dials is equally probable to...
Any data that's randomly spinning, so if these were just spinning in the wind, the chance that it would end up hitting those positions minus the red dots is equal, and it does look random if you look at it, completely random. And it's equal chance to any other dial. So there could be a little speck of dust that's created instead if they landed a different way. No light, nothing, just a speck of dust. From that dust, piece of dust's eyes, he's special, he's been picked. He has an intelligent designer, he thinks he's amazing. So this is only an issue, this fine-tuning argument is only an issue when we draw in these red bits and say we are special, therefore how can this be?
Yeah, but then that raises the question of, so if you use the example of, it would just be if there was dials were adjusted in a different way, it would just be a pile of dust, for example, and the dust would think that is what it's supposed to be. But that's the question. The dust can't do that. You need intelligent organisms that are interactive, that have, you know...
Yeah, of course, I'm not saying that.
So the question I would ask you is that you don't think that there's anything funny, anything that needs to be explained. The fact that basically out of any other possibility, we're not here, but the most like improbable things need to be done for us to be here. You don't think that points in any direction. You just kind of... The question is basically, the fact that we're here and the fact that we can understand these questions, isn't that a justification? Isn't that a reason for thinking, why is that the case? There must be a sort of reason that this happens.
Only because humans are seeing the world through your mind. You think life is valuable because you have life. That's why you think it's valuable. So the fact that you don't think life is valuable? I don't think in a logical sequence of events, does God exist? Does this prove that God exists? No, I don't. I think it's valuable because I love life, I enjoy experiencing life. Life is amazing, the world is amazing, isn't it beautiful? But these are, if we're looking at it in a logical way, rather than a how amazing is this world that I'm in way, it's an equal chance of creating life. Therefore, life is not special. It's rare, but it's just as rare as that one piece of dust, or just as rare as a rock in a different scenario, just as rare as a purple rainbow would be in another scenario. We see it as special because we are the humans that happen to be the random outcome.
Yes, can I just say, that's a really interesting point that you bring up. I don't think I've come across it before. But I think what the heart of what you're saying comes down to whether we can call any one configuration of reality special.
Yes.
That's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes.
We think of it because we're a particular kind of creature.
Yes.
And for our purposes that makes it special. But if you look beyond the human viewpoint, then there's really nothing different between them. And I think that's the point that...
Not that there's nothing different. No, I don't think that. I think there's a very, very big difference between life and no life. But I think if there is no God and there is no humanity, then who would dictate that life is special? No one. It would just be one of the outcomes. So we actually have to assume God or assume our self-importance in order for this argument to work.
But aren't you presupposing the non-existence of God in posing that question?
No, I'm not. I'm saying...
Well, you said if there was no God and if there was no universe or anything like that, there would be no one to care about which one it is.
But I'm not using this argument. You brought this argument to me saying because of the special configuration of how these dials are presented to me, therefore there is God. I'm saying, but is there even a special configuration? That's what I'm challenging.
The challenge that I sort of put back is that without even thinking of is it good for me or is it good for God or is it good for any intelligent consciousness, we can think of it just purely in naturalistic terms. The consequences of certain configurations are very different to the consequences of other configurations. So when you look at it just from that particular point of view. So for example, I don't know if this is a good analogy. If you take any set of 100,000 random words, okay? Now there's a very tiny, there is only one out of probably, it's not an infinite number, but it's a very large number of possible ways you could rearrange those words. Only one of them turns into the works of Shakespeare. Now I think what you want to say is, sure, but if kids didn't study Shakespeare in school, we wouldn't see, one would not be better than another, we would not think it's special.
If we didn't like Shakespeare, we wouldn't think that that was important.
Yes, but everybody likes Shakespeare, so I think that
No, that's not true. That's the exact, but you're touching on that exact point. That's what I'm saying. We think, we all love Shakespeare, but that doesn't
but
mean
what
it's
I'd
true.
like to say though is, the works of Shakespeare do contain certain truths that the other configurations don't contain. So whether there's anyone there to sit there and read them or not, they do contain that information. There is information there.
What's the truth that it contains because life exists?
Existential question for the human being to be or not to be.
Yeah, but that's because
moral
they're
questions and so on. Yeah, but there is information there, isn't there?
But there are questions that arise if you have life, but I don't see how it proves that life is any more special than
I think we're not saying that something is special or not special. The point is here we've got a phenomenon called the fine-tuning of the universe. It's basically you walked into that room. We're not saying that because we're saying basically you walked into that room and you've seen the dials adjusted in a certain way, or you've looked in the sky and you've seen skywriting, John loves Mary or whatever it is, and then you've got a choice then of how do you explain that phenomenon. You can kind of look at the sky and say John loves Mary, and you can say, oh, it could have been any various arrangement of clouds, could have made the exact same thing, and it wouldn't have been any different, and it would have been no different. If there was no one called John or no one called Mary, it wouldn't have been special to anyone. But the fact that there is this configuration that has a kind of a consequence, that it's the kind of expression of intelligence, means that there must be some sort of thing. You're basically saying out of those three options of you've got the fine tuning, you're basically saying that it's chance. It just happened by chance that we're here, and that's all there is. So you're basically betting that 1 out of 10 trillion that we're here, and that's it.
I've taken up enough time, but yeah, what I'm saying is I would like people to question why they think that their random number, which has an equal chance of occurring as any other random number to create them, is special. Yeah. Is it special just because you happen to be that random number?
Yeah, so the probability that we want to discuss is not the probability of this number versus any other individual number. It's the probability of this number versus, leading to one outcome that is entirely different than all of the other outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is the reason why there is something there to be explained. So you think there's nothing there to be explained though?
I think that you'll find that all the other outcomes, a lot of those are rare as well, and all of those have unique properties as well. They're not all the same and we're different. They're not all the same and we're different. There are many different. I mean, I'm not a physicist, you need to talk to somebody different. But I know
I think it's a good point, because this is not a point about physics. This is a point about philosophy, about interpreting what is something there to be explained. Is this configuration valuable in a certain way? Like, is there something here to be explained? Why is this configuration more important than any of the other configurations? And I think that the simple answer to that is because 99.99% of all configurations lead to nothingness, and the one configuration is to life. So that's the simple answer. Yes.
There's a hand over here.
Just bring it over to Paul.
Hello, my name's Paul. If God created the universe and fine-tuned the universe, He's done it for a reason, and the reason is He wanted life, He wanted us, because He loves us, and that's why life is special and number one.
Thanks for that. We'll listen to what Tim has to say, then we'll move down to my round.
Okay, just to continue on the teleological argument, I think the first thing is the universe, if it is fine-tuned for life, well, if it is fine-tuned for anything, it doesn't appear to be life, it appears to be more fine-tuned for black holes than it does for life. But the second point is, You said if you change the constants a little bit, life can exist. And I've added, well, I admit that to life as we know it cannot exist. So you're making the assumption that if life doesn't exist in the form that we know it to be, then life itself is inherently possible in these other variations. And there's a point behind that in that, to take one of the I want to use the word knobs, the dials, to take one of the dials we're talking about, the weak gravitational constants being one of them. You said that if you use that, if you move that even a hair's breadth, I believe is the term you used, if you alter it by even a hair's breadth, life wouldn't exist, the universe would fly apart. But they've done the mathematical modeling of this, and you can turn the weak gravitational constant right off, down to zero, as it were. And if you adjust with the other dials, then the universe can still exist in a form where matter could exist and life in another form could then exist. So you're saying it's one or nothing. And I don't think one universe would likely exist, and that's this one, or every other universal possibility could not. And I don't think that's a sound argument.
Yeah, so I'll take that second point that you So I'll just take that second point you were saying about life as we know it. So I think from the video, from my understanding of the argument is that if the constants were changed in any sort of way, if there was no ability for matter to coalesce, there was no even fundamental particles, then I'm not sure what you mean by life as we know it. There wouldn't be any sort of life whatsoever, unless you think a neutron or something is life.
No, that's my point, is that if you change the constants so that the weak gravitational constant or force is eliminated from the universe and then adjust the other constants, you can then get a universe that could support matter, which could then, and I'm still assuming matter is necessary for life, or matter as we know it is necessary for life, but even with that assumption, you can still have a universe with different fundamental gravitational other such constants and have a universe that has the matter with the ability to then lead on to life.
Yeah.
Just a very quick response before that. You're quite right that maybe, and I'd love to see any papers you've come across where they actually have done the calculations, because I've never seen that. Don't assume it could be done, that you could twiddle one dial and then twiddle others to compensate. But even if you do that, you haven't really changed the argument at all, because you would still have to accept that the set of possible configurations that allow the physical universe to exist is a teensy-weensy tiny subset of the set of all the other possible configurations that can be. All you've done is you've changed it maybe from a fine-tuning factor of 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 300 or whatever, into 1 to 10 to the 100 or whatever.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah.
Ask my
I can talk to you afterwards if you want.
I think the thing with that is that when you're saying that when you look at the universe as we see it, we see the fine-tuning, quote-unquote fine-tuning, therefore God exists. If you alter that so there's another possibility, because of the humongous numbers, it's a bit difficult because I'm working within the metaphor of a dial system. I don't know that's necessarily
Give you some time to figure it out. We'll head on to the next person. We'll come back.
Yes, that's fine.
Alright, so just on that conversation, so what's your name?
Timothy.
Timothy, you're a Christian? Are you an atheist?
Atheist.
Yes, cool. Okay, so on that, there was an atheist doctor, a professor at Cambridge. When they did the study, they said, for anything to be different, these constants that you were speaking on, it would have to be 1 to the 10 to the 40,000 for anything to be possible for it to leave up to chance. If it was up to chance, we have 1 to the 10 to 40,000. It's almost impossible. It is literally impossible for us to even fathom the fact that we can change it. And what's really powerful about this idea of the grand intelligence that creates a universe, because I hear Timothy speaking about changing the constants. We can't change the constants.
I'm not saying we can.
If we did, what I'm saying is, what's awesome about that is that the creator who created the universe has set them. And if it was set any other way, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. So also, one thing I just want to share, David Galinsky. Do you know David Galinsky? Have you heard of David Galinsky?
I know the name, I don't know the details.
So Richard Dawkins is one of the world's most famous atheists. He wrote the God Delusion. David Galinsky wrote a response to that called the Devil's Delusion. Okay? David Galinsky is a secular Jew. You say borderline skeptic. He wrote this, and I just want to share with you because the third point is the idea of fine-tuning. And he says, has anyone provided proof for God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is? Not even close. Have our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything as long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not even close. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise of intellectual contempt? Dead on.
While I disagree with pretty much every point in that list, I think, let me just go to the fundamental. I disagree with Richard Dawkins all the time, but it doesn't mean that he's...
This is David Galinsky.
No, I realize that, but I'm saying Richard Dawkins being the premier example of atheist at the moment, there are things he says that I disagree with, that doesn't mean he's wrong on everything.
Yeah. So could you tell me how it's up to chance?
No, the point I'm about to go on is that you're saying, have they done this? No. Have they done this? No. Have they done this? No. But you're shifting the burden of proof. You claim that a God exists. I, as an atheist, say, I don't accept that belief. So the burden of proof is on you. Just because I haven't or cannot do something doesn't make your position any stronger. And that's my point with the fine-tuning argument, is that you're claiming that, I'm saying, for these reasons I don't accept it, and I have issues with all four positions or arguments put forth. But I'm saying I don't accept it for these reasons, and you're saying, well, can you then disprove it? And that's a fallacy of reasoning, it's called shifting the burden of proof. It's a fallacy, I don't know much more I can say to that.
Specifically what I'm asking you, Timothy, is do we have the possibility to change what has been created? And if we cannot change what's been created, so we're speaking this from an evolution perspective, from a natural perspective, or from a theist perspective? What's your entry point? Are we speaking this from science or philosophy? Because they're two very, very different things.
No, one's a subset of the other. Science is a subset of philosophy.
Scientifically, it goes up to chance, we're doing it.
I don't agree with that, but just because we can't do something doesn't mean...
Why don't you explain what the burden of proof is for everybody? That might help, or why they have the burden of proof. Because people might not know what that jargon is.
The burden of proof is basically, I'm trying to symbolize because my field is epistemology. The burden of proof comes...
If you want to explain it for you, it's alright. It's basically saying that the atheist or agnostic or skeptic is making no claim, so he's not saying I believe or don't believe this. The Christian is saying, the theist is saying God exists because of this reason, so he has to explain and prove why those reasons are true. And the atheist has to say, okay, he has to critique that. Why is that? Why is that? So what he's saying, he was accusing you of switching the burden of proof, is saying that you have to prove why my argument is wrong.
Very negative. Yeah. But I also expand that to any positive claim you make, whether it's a claim of existence or claim against existence or claim that does happen or doesn't happen. Yeah. If you make a claim, you have to back it up and you have that burden of proof. Yeah. Irrespective of what that claim is.
Sure. Trying to give this away.
I want to challenge the morality. I want to challenge you on the morality. You said that there's no, if objective morality exists and God exists, objective morality exists.
No, so if God does not exist, objective morality does not exist.
And then, second point is objective morality exists. I'd like to challenge that. I don't think we can have. Sorry, Mike's terrible. I think we could have a world where we have subjective morality and accept that as standard. I don't think we have to have objective morality
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to, I guess. That's what, like, I think each person has to ask themselves, do they really believe that objective morality exists? And the question that basically makes it very clear cut for me is that, is it wrong for anyone at any time to torture a child for fun? And if the answer to that is no, or if the answer to that is yes, it is wrong to torture a child for fun, then it's very clear that claim of truth is true for all people at all times in all areas, and that's what it means to say something's objective. When I say you're objectively there, I'm saying that you actually exist independently of me. So I think morality exists independently of whether certain people believe certain different things. So just because someone believes it's alright to murder someone doesn't mean it is right to murder someone. And well, basically yeah, go.
Yeah, look, I know because you're using the graphic imagery torturing a child and it makes it seem very confronting.
That's the truth, that's the reality.
I know, but what I was saying to that is when you say it's wrong, I mean, what are we saying?
So turn the volume down on the phone.
Is that the mic on?
Is that? Hey.
Yeah, so when you're saying it's wrong, I'd say, yeah, I agree that I feel that that's a bad thing to do, but I feel like that's because if you look at it as objectively, if we say, just looking outside the world, you can't actually say that that's a wrong or evil thing. It's just something that happens, like a volcano erupting, the cat eating the mouse, a child being tortured. In the scheme of things, like just a completely cold, person outside of that situation, outside of our humane feelings towards that, is just another event happening in the universe, just some more, in a naturalistic universe, it's just some more particles being rearranged. So I think what I'm trying to say is, in a subjective morality, we're creating morality, and I think you could argue that it's kind of based from our evolution, that we're just trying to survive, and as, if we want a morality that's good for us. So I don't want my kids to be tortured, so I would say that torturing kids is bad. I don't want, bad things to happen to me. I don't want to be murdered, so murdering is bad. And, I don't want people to steal from me, so we say that stealing is bad.
Yeah, so you don't. So when in that perspective, when you say murder is bad,
your mic's not working.
It's not. You're not saying that it's actually bad. It's just saying that we'll convince everyone that it's bad, so no one does it.
And we don't want it done to us. So blanket rule.
Yeah.
So there was a comment over there, and I'll have a go.
Turn the mic on.
Please do not depend.
Right, so I also just wanted some clarification on talk about the morality, particularly when you mentioned the aspects as well, because to me that was kind of proof that it kind of negates your argument, I thought, because if there's different, particularly within theists, if there's different thoughts on what morality is, then that doesn't really show like a direct link to God and an objective morality. And also, where does God fit into this? Where's the link? Where's the proof of God in this objective morality? So I wasn't quite sure from what you said. I didn't quite pick up where exactly that was.
Oh, you saying like how does the morality link into God?
Yeah, and where is the proof of that? And because I didn't quite get that.
So sort of an answer to both the things and what we understand, what you're saying. It's okay. The argument for morality and the argument for free will, I think they have a similar structure. Correct me if I'm wrong. In the sense that they're saying that one of the arguments for believing God does not exist is that we look around us and all we see is atoms and energy bouncing around in space and time. And there doesn't seem to be any place for God in that. That naturalistic view of the universe seems to explain everything, and therefore we have no need to put God in the picture. Now, what objective morality and free will suggests is that atoms of energy bouncing around in space and time do not explain everything. That's the argument. My understanding is that's how that argument progresses. And therefore, the argument says, not that therefore there is the God of Christianity, but that there must be something beyond just atoms of energy in space and time. Because otherwise you wouldn't have free will. Where would the free will come from? And otherwise you wouldn't have objective morality. You know, as Mina was saying, things just happen. That's all that there is. Now, coming to the morality part, it is really, I was actually surprised when I started reading up on this a little while ago, that modern philosophy has come around to the view that basically there either is objective morality or no morality at all. The thing that you're putting forward, that subjective morality, relativism, it's up to us to make our own morality, that actually seems not to be a starter. Because if you think about it, okay, you may decide that you think that torturing kids is a bad thing because you have kids, and that's the only reason we should do it. Ultimately, you are under no obligations to not torture your kids. If you were to torture your kids, all you're doing is going against something you or the people around you made up. The only obligation you have is if you have a social obligation to them. But nothing stops you from doing it. There's nothing wrong intrinsically in you doing it. An example that you could put is what is morally wrong if somebody decided to steal 5 cents from everybody's bank account in the whole world. Okay, is that morally wrong? Okay. I think most people intuitively would say that seems wrong. Okay, but really you're not hurting anybody, you're not really doing, maybe breaking a convention. You could make the argument that there's nothing to stop me from doing that, so long as I don't get caught. Okay? If I got caught, that would be a different reason for me to not do it. But if I didn't get caught, if I could take 5 cents from everybody's bank account in the whole world, why do I know it's wrong? Okay. The only reason you can really say, actually, I think that's wrong, is there has to be something that isn't just up to you and me, or up to human beings, or up to anybody else. And there seem to be, and I think that's, the example of the tortured child is meant to show that there are certain things that don't, really, the way I've heard it put is it right to torture, is it ever okay to torture a child for no good reason? Not even for fun. Because fun, you may say, well, I think I'm the most important person in the world, and if that gives me joy, then I should do it. But no, for no good reason at all. There seem to be some things that, no matter how you try and look at it, it's not a social convention. It's actually something that is intrinsically built into the nature and the character of the universe, that there are some things that are just wrong.
Yeah, I think the example was within the video. It's more like to convince someone that there is objective morality is like there's no sort of the way that we do it is we say, for example, it's like as the same way that we experience the world around us, like in terms of our sense perception, the fact that I can see you now, or that you exist, we have kind of the same in the sense of in a moral sense, the fact that we naturally just believe things to be right and wrong, and like the question is, what reason is there to doubt that experience? That experience is something we doubt, we experience in day-to-day life, but there's no good reason to doubt that experience. It's kind of similar to the sense experience.
I just want to, so I think you could still make an argument that a lot of that is taught socially, and maybe like some of it might be intrinsic, but again, you could just say that's part of, animals that like to generally destroy other animals of their same breed for no good reason. It's kind of collective protective, they try and protect each other, and there's even communities where they can all benefit from each other. So intrinsically, it's probably wrong for us to try and destroy other things, people in our species. And I think a lot of, what you're saying could be taught socially as well. That's why we have strong feelings about what's right and wrong. That's how we're brought up in society. And I think that you could make the argument that, just like you said, the Aztecs had different morality than us, and now we have a morality, and I think you could say that that's because we think of what's good for our society and try and implement that, and that's the way that kind of each generation evolves morally, trying to create the best society they can and change the standards.
very good point. Just because some or even many of our morals are subjective, coming from society, doesn't necessarily mean that all morals are subjective. There may still be some that are objective, and really only need one objective moral to prove this argument, like to make that premise valid in the argument.
Yeah, and I think that what it comes down to is everyone needs to decide for themselves if they believe that that second premise is true. Do you really believe that it is wrong to do those things? And I think that would be that would kind of convince you whether or not you should accept that argument. Was there just go through my thoughts? Yeah.
My answer is just to the lady next to Timothy, where she talked about everything is like a coincidence.
Sorry?
Or not a coincidence, but it's not special. Like, if we just look at the Earth, like we can see that it's the only planet that's got life, you know? And other people think that, you know, there's UFOs and all that rubbish, but, you know, we've never found any other planet that has animals and humans and, you know, all these different life forms. So, of course the Earth is special, you know? You can't say there's another planet like it in the whole universe, because they haven't found any that have life forms. So I don't understand what you're talking about, that's not special. Of course it's special, you know?
Yeah, okay, so my answer to that would just really be reiterating my point in possibly a more clear way. I guess, as humans, what we decide we value, what we say is special, what we say is meaningful, are the things that we enjoy in our lives from our eyes. So what you enjoy in your life and how, you know, you love your family who happen to be human and happen to be alive. Because we have, or maybe not have, objective morality or, you know, feelings, emotions, love of God, etc. These are the things that you consider to be special and important because that is you, that is who you are. If it wasn't who you were, say you were a speck of dust, and I'm not saying that dust has cognition, but say you were something else, say you were Mars, the planet, or you were some, you know, some other thing, you would no longer, you would cease to think that Earth was special. You would think, oh, that's one option, just like Venus is one option, and Uranus is one option. You wouldn't think that you were special. You know, so that's what I'm sort of getting at. I'm saying, but if all options are equal, if you need to spin those dials randomly, you know, it happens to land on your dial, that doesn't make you special. Basically, you're only seeing as...
So what you're saying is that having life or being a human is not special? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying we think it is special, from our perception it's special because that's who we are. You know, so what would be a good example? Yeah, religion's a great one, you know, so, so for instance, if you're Christian, you think Christianity's right. If you're Islamic, you think Islam's right. You know, if you're a Jew, you think Judaism's right. You think you have the correct religion, that your God is telling you to follow that particular book. That's what I'm getting at. So your perspective is what makes you think that your experience is important, your experience is valid and important. Yeah, so I actually separate myself from what I enjoy in my life and how I think that my life is great. And I do act to try and increase my well-being. That's what I do because I'm enjoying being me. But if I wasn't me, if I was something else, I would then think I was important in that role.
Sorry for that.
Just quickly, so the point you made before that is, you know, if any one of those dials retreats into any other form of combination, there could be some alternative reality that exists, and something such someone in that reality can make the case for why that combination is so special because it means something to them. In what alternative reality would there exist such a, as we were saying, a speck of dust, this planet and whatnot? What else could exist within a certain set of combination of those dials that would have the ability and the capacity to even say, I'm special, or to even have the ability to build that case?
So I guess that would be that ability and that capacity to discuss things, to, you know, contemplate things, to rationalize. They're all human traits. They're all things that you value as a human. Well, there might not be. There might be animals, there might be all sorts of things. But consciousness, life, is something that you value because you hold that trait.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to is the first premise of the argument. So which of the premises are you saying is not true? Is that what I'm saying? Like,
I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm saying that I don't find it a problem.
You don't find it a problem in the first place.
So the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either chance, necessity, or design. It's not due to chance or necessity. So number two is where I disagree, but I do think it's due to chance. But that's not what makes my argument weak. That's not what makes your argument weak. What makes your argument weak is that you think chance isn't important. You think that that's a problem because you think that one outcome is more, amazing than the other outcome.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to is what we all have to decide is that if you guys walk into the room and you see all the dials arranged in a certain way, if you agree that that is something special, or that's something that, or not something special, I'm getting stuck into the terminology, but if you agree that that is something to be explained, then this argument will go through. If you think that that's just another random configuration, all happens to be, in the right configuration, that's fine, I guess I'll just walk out, then first of all, you shouldn't work on the SETI project for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, because all configurations of things are all, no, just joking. But then I guess we will have to decide basically, if you think that it is something to be explained, then the argument will go through. I guess if you don't think that there is anything to explain, I'm confused, I just don't understand how, why you think that walking into a room and seeing all those dials in a certain way isn't something odd that needs to be explained.
I think what we're saying is objectively speaking, so even outside human, objectively speaking, having a universe with agents being able to have consciousness and observe that universe is more interesting than just matter being created. So a universe with matter and agents specifically designed to observe the very universe that they're in, objectively I would say that that's interesting.
To those agents?
Not to those agents, I'd say objectively speaking.
Well, what's the word interesting? I mean, interesting presupposes someone finding it interesting.
Well, I'd say suspicious. I mean, use a word that doesn't require someone, I'd say objectively speaking.
Any thought process implies a subject thinking that. So you need to take yourself out of the picture entirely and actually think about the chances of it happening rather than the importance of it happening. So the chances are equal that it would have landed on those random dialed screws
for
as any
example,
other.
if you saw a million universes and only one of them had life in it, you would say there's something odd. All the other universes just have matter that, they're all very similar, but this one has something
They're not all very
different.
similar though. If they were all the same, I would agree, right? And also all the dials are pointing one direction. Say the number was 10 for gravity, and it was 10 for light, it was 10 for oxygen. Sure, I'd agree as well that it's fine-tuned. But it's not. They're random dials.
Can I interrupt this?
If it was all pointing 10,
it's the life creating range, that's what we're talking about.
Sorry guys, if I can just interrupt. I just want to bring up a really nice quote here from G.K. Chesterton, who said that one elephant having a trunk seemed odd. All elephants having trunks looked like a plot. I'll leave you to wake up. We only have 15 minutes left. Perhaps in the 15 minutes we could go on to some of the other topics rather than sort of spending the whole time on just a few. So if there are other questions and topics, maybe it'd be good to ask.
I think Ned has had his hand up for a while.
Sorry, what was your name? Ned.
Okay. Marcin, just to be safe, your summary from this presentation, you would say that God exists, right? That's the conclusion you conclude from this presentation.
Yeah. It makes more sense to say that God exists. It makes sense of our experience as humans. Yeah.
It's more complicated going on, but if you can elaborate on what I'm going to say. I don't think you actually dealt with the question from tonight, does God exist? I think your entire presentation deals with, did God exist? And it's a completely different question, because if you ask, well, did dinosaurs exist? Yeah, they did. Do they? No, they don't. Perhaps perhaps even if we assume that God existed at some point or the other, if He is the Creator, all these arguments not prove that He exists today. Let's assume that God's nutrition is human food, for example. If we stop thinking about Him, if the entire world becomes atheist, perhaps He will die. Perhaps He actually died thousands of years ago. I mean, the presentation doesn't deal with does God exist. The presentation deals with
I'm not sure why you think that. Can you explain why you think that? Because all the conclusions have the conclusion, therefore God exists.
Sorry?
So all the conclusions, all the arguments have the same conclusion.
That God exists.
Therefore God exists. So to deny the conclusion God exists now, you have to deny all of the premises.
No, not really. All I'm saying is that every single argument He presented, assuming that I don't have a counter argument to, proves that God existed. He created. He programmed us with morality. He did. It's all in the past tense.
Yeah.
But there was no single argument for His existence.
So, for example, a good example, a good counter example to what you just said would be the moral argument. If God ceased to exist, then objective morality was
not really, because He existed once upon a time and He programmed us with a morality code.
Yeah. But so if He programmed us and then suddenly somehow God went out of the picture, then that programming, what's the reference of that program? Why is the program still?
If you walk into a room and you find Windows running, does that mean that programmer is in the room?
But we're talking about morality, which is something that is like, which something that is basically, it's in terms of actions and behaviors, and an action or behavior, like the more closely it's correlated to God's nature, that's what makes it good or bad. So for it to be correlated to God's nature has to be something that is there in many senses. And a similar point, for example, would be the origin of the universe, the cosmological argument. So one of the conclusions is that the cause of the universe is something that's eternal.
Yeah, but the existence of your works doesn't prove your existence now. What Steve was just telling me, does Shakespeare exist? But his work is living, and you can find too many people reciting his work. It doesn't mean that he exists now. He existed once upon a time. So it's two different.
Yeah, how does that relate to God?
Sorry.
Yeah, just because you give an example of someone that can had made work and then he died. How is that related to
for arguments? Let's argue that.
We'll go to that. If doesn't,
you go. I'm not sure if my point was clear or not.
I had a separate question, but I'll try and address that. In terms of our understanding of God, I think in your case, you're assuming that God has a limit. We're working under the...
No, I didn't assume, sorry.
Okay, but based on your argument, you are placing God as having a limit to His existence. We're presenting the argument as God being infinite, out of space.
Let's assume that God converted Himself into the universe and He ceased to exist as God and He became what we saw. It doesn't mean that He exists at the moment. He created something and He vanished.
Well, we'd then be speaking about Christianity in a very similar sense, but that still limits God, because we're assuming that God can contain Himself, where God doesn't have any physical containment. He is outside the universe and within the universe at the same time. So if we were to say that God is dead, then we are therefore putting a new presumption before the argument, saying that if God ceases to exist, then the universe continues to exist. Whereas our argument is that God must continue to exist for the universe to exist.
I'm sorry, now you're assuming God's characteristics.
No, that's a part of the initial argument.
Yeah, I think a more relevant argument that would address your question would be, for example, the argument from contingency, which means that the explanation for the existence of the universe is God, in the sense that what that argument is trying to say that the reason that there is anything is because God is the one who basically creates and sustains the universe. And the conclusions that come out of the contingency argument is that God is a self-existent, eternal being, and self-existent, eternal beings continue to exist all the time. So that's and as well the ontological argument, for example, in the concept of God in Christianity, for example, as you know, would be that of an eternal, everlasting being who exists by himself, like out of necessity, basically.
I don't want to take too much time. I want to leave it for some someone else. All I'm saying is that if God, who has no limit, who once upon a time didn't have any limits, if he can create a system that is self-efficient, if it is sustainable in itself, which he can, assuming that he had all the power, it doesn't mean that he today exists. All it means is that he was in the past tense powerful, he was limitless, he was
eternal.
He was eternal, but it doesn't mean that he continues to be eternal. It doesn't mean he continues to be eternal.
Eternal because we exist I think we settled that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
As much as you want to touch on more argument, for the sake of diversity, I think let's go to Kalam. William Lane Craig phrased it, and I know he's a sort of premier position of this, or proponent of this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, universe began to exist, universe has a cause. I think both of those premises are flawed. Both of those premises are flawed. The more obvious one is the universe began to exist. The Big Bang doesn't go back to the singularity, it goes back to the Planck time, and prior to that, it's a metaphorical speaking, it's a black box with a question mark on it, we don't know. And to say that the Big Bang was always presupposed as the beginning,
I think that
is to extrapolate
we're
beyond
not saying that the Big Bang Theory itself is the beginning. I think the correct way to phrase it is that the Big Bang Theory predicts that there is a beginning of the universe. It doesn't describe and model. I'm pretty sure it does.
No, it's an expansion event. The Big Bang is an expansion event that's mapped as far back as the Planck time, but not to a beginning. There's a distinct difference there.
But the Planck time is a kind of beginning.
Then a kind of beginning, sure. So my life is a kind of beginning, but it's not existed before that.
So my question would be, so does the Planck time exist indefinitely into the past?
No, the Planck time is a representation of as far back as we can say, and as an atheist, and I'm pretty sure physicists as well say we don't know beyond that, you're saying we do know beyond that, but you're sort of applying to the Big Bang, which doesn't actually apply to that region.
Yeah, well, I guess that's where the BVG theorem comes into place as well.
So, where what?
The Borges-Lincoln theorem. Have you got it on?
Do you know the infinity thing?
That's the argument that says it's a kind of a very general set of equations that says that for any universe that's on average expanding throughout all of its history, it cannot be extrapolated to past infinity, which means it has a beginning. And our universe is one of those that fulfills that with the cosmological.
Not necessarily, because going forward, quite possibly going backwards, it could be the case that there's an infinite succession of universe, and I'm not saying it's the case, but it could be the case that there's an infinite succession of expansion, crunch, expansion, crunch, and there's an expansion phase.
So that's
to argue that there's a problem with an infinite revision of the universe means that you cannot then make an eternal God, because that's without special pleading, which is a fallacy. There is no difference between an eternally existing God and an eternally existing universe here meaning in some form of the universe, without appealing to that fallacy of special pleading.
We're not saying that. We're saying that the problem is there has to be something that has always been there, that is the source of something else.
Why can't that be?
And the thing is, exactly, the reason it can't be the universe is that, for all those reasons, the reason that it can't be a past eternal. So, for example, the philosophical arguments, the fact which raise doubts on whether there is such a thing as an actual infinite, and if there isn't such a thing as an actual infinite, if it's logically impossible or mathematically impossible for there to be something that's infinite, then it's impossible for the universe to have been in the past. And I think the main thing that I was talking about, just because we're talking about the specific scientific theories, we're not talking about all the other reasons to believe that the universe has become to exist, which is the BVG theorem, which does apply to our universe. And you were talking before about the oscillating models. The oscillating models they've pretty much been out for about 30 years.
I'm not saying that is the case. I'm saying that could be. It's an example of what could have occurred. Like the fundamental point still is the Big Bang model describes an expansion event. It does not describe a beginning event. That beginning event is still unknown to us. Hence why there are physicists such as Lawrence Krauss who are proposing, and Sean Carroll who proposes models of how that could occur. The Big Bang event is simply and only an expansion event from a very early time period, temporal location, through to now, like that. But the difference here is you put a light ball at the beginning to indicate the Big Bang, whereas what that should be is a black box with a question mark saying, we don't know what that is there, and if prior to that has any meaning outside of space and time, because time is limited to that itself. But outside of that, we don't know. That's the honest answer.
Yeah.
Say, we don't know.
But that's what I'm countering you by saying that the fact is that we do have reasonable evidence to believe that the universe did begin to exist, and one of the reasons for that was the Bohr-Mencken theorem, which is very general. It applies to our universe, very, very general set of equations. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I'm not sure if you are familiar with it. But basically, a universe that's on average expanding will eventually have to come back to a beginning, and that's what the theorem states. And so it's basically widely acknowledged by
sorry guys,
it was better than forms.
Sorry guys, we're going to have to cut it short because our time has run out. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you to everyone today for a fascinating night, I have to say. We've brought up a lot of really interesting discussion points. You'll be pleased to know there are some nice snacks outside to fuel some further discussion, so please do feel free to hang around and continue pursuing some of those issues that came up. Of course, in a discussion with a large number of people, it is very hard to kind of really get into the nitty-gritty of things, but hopefully in your small little groups you'll be able to get much further and get a few more words in. Thank you everyone for being so participatory, if that's really a word, I'm not quite sure. But it really makes the night quite interesting. And a special thank you to Rob for presenting tonight and for I would also like to say a special word of welcome to everybody who's not from the Coptic community but who came to join us today. You really make our meetings much more interesting and much more stimulating and thought-provoking. So thank you all for your coming and your participation, and I hope that you found it at least a little bit enlightening. And, as you know, our purpose here is not to give the answer, but to get you to ask more questions. I think we succeeded at that tonight.